COP29 summit is taking place at a time when, ironically, 2024 is set to be the hottest year in civilization of the longest time that it's been recorded. Can these countries come together, the developed and the developing and the least developed, to find ways to mitigate the effect of climate change, especially on those countries that are impacted the most? Can they identify ways to increase funding to ensure that those who transition in the climate change challenges are covered for? That's the big question, and that's exactly what we are asking today as well on India Global. That as far as India is concerned, what is at stake for India in COP29? Remember, India is positioning itself to be a leader as far as climate challenges are concerned. What is India's position on climate finance and climate accountability is our key question. And let me take that, in fact, to Zerin Osho Bamezai, who is the Director, India Program, Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, joining me from Baku. Thank you so much for taking out the time. And let me start by asking you, as far as India's stake in this year's COP29 summit in Baku, what, according to you, is New Delhi's stake as far as this summit?
India is going to be looking at, very closely. We do not have a pavilion this year. And we are also expecting Minister Bhupinder Yadav to not join this year's COP meeting. What we're going to be expecting is essentially India to follow very closely the negotiations of the NCQG, which is the new finance goal of $1 trillion. This is going to be critical for developing countries to transition away from fossil fuels. And for India in particular, this goal is very important because it finances the gap in our adaptation financing. So last year, 2023, we had the global goal on adaptation, which identified $366 billion as the gap in financing for adaptation. This adaptation finance is critical for India as the heat stress grows. When we have more heat trapping emissions in India, we're starting to look at human survivability testing temperatures of upwards of 50 degrees centigrade. We are looking at a loss of agricultural output. We are looking at impacts on health. So this adaptation finance is going to be key for India. And with the Trump presidency in the US, a lot of it is uncertain. So I think, in my opinion, that is what the government of India is going to be closely following. But of course, unlike other years, we do not have a delegation at present in the pavilion.
All right, Zerin, what about India's stance as far as climate finance accountability is concerned this year?
India's stance on climate accountability is always been the same. It's basically defined by a principle called common but differentiated responsibility. Accountability is key for India to understand how the budgeting of carbon emissions is going to be done, how the finance is going to be flowing for countries like ours in India, which haven't necessarily caused the problem of climate change historically. These two are key. One is to define what is the amount of aspirations of countries like India, China, Global South that are going to be met using carbon budgets. And then the second one is going to be carbon financing, which is going to relate to how those accountability targets are going to be set. We're also looking at the operationalization of Article 6, which is of the carbon markets. So those two are essentially going to be the focus of India's carbon accountability on finance and the budgeting.
Zerin, how important is the operationalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement?
Operationalization of Article 6 is key, not only for India, but for the developing countries. Now, with a lack of understanding and certainty with regard to climate finance flowing from the US in light of the recent elections, and with Europe also sort of being uncertain with the fall of the coalition government in Germany, France being completely missing from action here in Azerbaijan, we can look at different instruments of financing taking lead. Article 6 is one of them. So if you want to go into the deeper sets of finance, look at financing projects in the Global South, and also sort of easing out the transition away from fossil fuel, it is important that Article 6 gets operationalized. We need to understand what the operating procedure is going to be, what the financial mechanism is going to look like, what are we going to trade. And one very important point for India, which is the need of the hour for us, is to understand how the framework is going to be set up. To give you an example, we currently use the IPCC methodology, which allows for conversions of all greenhouse gases to CO2 equivalency. It is time we also look into scratching the surface slightly more deeper and understanding why it is important to have the phenomenon of trading like for like. To give you an example, a lot of our methane emissions, which constitute about 14% of India's total emissions profile, are coming from sectors that do not necessarily have a lot of funding and financing or technology innovation. For example, paddy cultivation. It is very important that the government of India, which is already announcing its intention of converting swaths of land from the inundated fields into AWD, which is alternate wetting and drying, and to DSR, deep-seeded rice, start figuring out how it is to create financial incentives. So operationalization of Article 6, including the concept of trading like for like, where we look at GWP 20 for trading methane instead of 100, is going to be key in understanding how to create those financial instruments to get the farmer in India more invested in the transition away from inundated fields, for example, to other technologies and practices to be adopted. Operationalization of Article 6 is going to be key.
All right, Zerin, thanks much for taking out the time and really decoding all this for us.